In the previous videos and on our journey to understand the Creator's calendar, we have observed how the fixing of dates and the watching out for celestial alignments go contrary to the divinely appointed times of Elohim. However, we do know that the year is to begin with a month which marks a period, and Yahweh makes it known that this is the month of Abib. This is the month wherein the Passover is to be kept. The Holy Word does not record a conjunction or presetting of events, but uses the specific term Abib. This is what we shall now look out for and explore in much more detail. So, what is Abib? It was at the seventh plague in the land of Egypt that scripture records that the barley was smitten because it was Abib. The hail destroyed this crop because it was in a brittle stage, which means it was in a ripened state. At the 10th plague, the Passover was instituted by Elohim. This was in the month of Abib, and this month is to begin the biblical year. Now, the months are ordinarily begun with the sighting of a new moon, and a year will normally consist of 12 months. But the new moon and something referred to as Abib now marks the month that begins the year. First, how do we know that new moons indeed begin the months? From scriptures. For example, Psalm 104,
He made the moon to mark the seasons, the sun knows its time for setting.
and Psalm 81.
Blow the trumpet at the new moon, at the full moon on our feast day.
We can comfortably now begin to gather our information. It was in the new moon month called Abib that the first Passover on earth was held when Israel left Egypt, and that which begins the year. What is Abib? This is the term and the Hebrew root word used in that verse, Abib. It is a condition most exclusively related to the barley crop, which will be the first in the year to grow in the regions of Israel. The King James Version translates Abib to mean in the ear or green ears of corn. This is wrong. The crop being Abib does not necessarily mean color. However, if barley is in this stage, it is useless for the harvest. It still contains too much moisture and cannot be ground into flour. When barley is Abib, it is in a specific state of maturity that will enable a harvest in the upcoming 14 to 21 days, hence 2 to 3 weeks, at which point it would have dried enough with the grains, then being hard and making a pounding into crushed flour possible. Thus, the first month has been named by the Creator after a development level of the barley crop. There can be no mistake. Equinoxes are never once mentioned. Remember, if we get the first holy feast date wrong, all upcoming feasts in the year will be invalid. We have to diligently mark out the proper day.
These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim as times of holy convocation, for presenting to the Lord food offerings, burnt offerings, and grain offerings, sacrifices and drink offerings, each on its proper day.
We soon discover that this marking is all centralized on the barley crop. As said before, we will have a new moon to start the month. There will be a timeline in this month. Abib barley is now needed to determine further progress on the holy timescale. On the 14th of the Abib month is the day the Passover lamb has to be sacrificed. The immediate following 7 days are the days of unleavened bread. It is a commandment that this feast must also take place in the Abib month, which it will if we are by default following the Abib method.
You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the month Abib, for in the month Abib you came out from Egypt.
From its Abib state, the barley will naturally need a further 2 weeks to be harvest ready. This has already been implemented in Elohim's calculations. The first fruits of the crop has to be presented to the priest in the week of unleavened bread, after the weekly Sabbath. This is also a commandment.
You shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord so that you may be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath the priest shall wave it.
In the 7 days of matzah or unleavened bread, there will always be a weekly Sabbath day. We have the sacrificial week of Yeshua, for example, here. If the Sabbath were on the 19th instead of the 17th as depicted in this chart, then the first fruit offering will be on the 20th, the first day of the week. Now, the first fruits also mean that the harvest is to start. Israel may not eat of the crop until the Bikurim or the first fruits offering has been presented before the priest. At the first fruits, the harvest begins. The barley has now moved from being Abib to being harvestable. This is also a requirement.
You shall count 7 weeks. Begin to count the 7 weeks from the time the sickle is first put to the standing grain.
From the Bikurim, we now number the 7th Sabbath to count down to Shavuot, which is Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks.
Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as the Lord your God blesses you.
Without the barley being in the Abib state, there is no possible way of determining these set times. We repeat, we need the barley development and not the equinox. Very simple and totally dependent on the divine appointment of Yahweh. New moons are seen all around the globe, and barley too is grown worldwide. Where does the sighting and observation now take place?
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, When you come into the land that I give you, and reap its harvest, you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest.
All the conditions must be met in the Holy Land Israel. No other place is acceptable to the Father. Our salvation is tied into Israel. So we will briefly summarize. Abib shall be the beginning of months. It is when Israel left Egypt. Matzah is to be eaten in the month of Abib. The first fruits are brought in the month of Abib. The Passover has to be kept in the month of Abib. The harvest is to begin in the month of Abib. All is dependent on the Abib stage of the barley. But wasn't the barley already Abib at the 7th plague in Egypt? Yet Israel left at the 10th plague. Was this not too late? Remember in Leviticus 23, the 10th verse, we know that the right conditions are met in Israel to begin the month and feast. It was the Almighty, the Creator Himself, who knew of these conditions and instituted these first feasts for Israel. When the barley is Abib and the new moon is sighted in Israel, then may we begin with the celebration of the Father's holy feasts. So I do hope that these studies have helped you to understand how the calendar of the Creator is derived. And knowing this, we now look forward to the right conditions in Israel, where the Father makes it known when His holy feast days are to begin. Shalom to you, my friend, in Yeshua's name.